Today we're going to be looking at absolute value. And in order to solve absolute value equations, we need to understand what absolute value means. The absolute value of a number defines its distance from zero. So for instance, how many spaces away from zero is 4? 4 units. So the absolute value of 4 is 4. But how many spaces from zero is negative 4? It's also 4. So the absolute value of negative 4 is also 4. So basically, when we're taking the absolute value of a number, we're just making it positive. But when we're solving equations, we have to look at it the other way around. What units, or how many units away from 0 is that number? So for instance, if we have an equation like this, the absolute value of x equals 7, this is asking us which numbers are 7 units away from 0. So another way we could write this that will help us in future problems is x is how far away from 0. This is the difference or the distance between x and 0. So which numbers are 7 units away from 0? Well, if we start at 0 and we go 7 one way, where do we end up? 7. And if we go 7 the other way, where do we end up? Negative 7. So the solutions are 7 and negative 7. Both 7 and negative 7 have an absolute value of 0. So what I can do when I have an absolute value equation is I know that absolute value makes both positive and negative a positive number. So if I'm taking the absolute value of x minus 3, and I get 8, then either x minus 3 was 8 to begin with, or x minus 3 equaled negative 8, because either one of those would have given me an absolute value of positive 8. And so to solve this equation, I can solve those two individually. So to get rid of the absolute value, I just make one positive and one negative. And then I solve the way I normally solve. And I get x equals 11. And on the other one, I get x equals negative 5. And I can check, does 11 minus 3 have an absolute value of 8? Well, it is 8, so yes. Does negative 5 minus 3 have an absolute value of 8? Well, negative 5 minus 3 is negative 8, and the absolute value of negative 8 is positive 8. So that works as well. So our first step in solving absolute value equations is always to isolate the absolute value part, get that by itself. So in this equation, we want to get everything away from the absolute value. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add 5 to both sides. That will leave us with 3 times the absolute value of 2x minus 7 equals 9. Then I divide both sides by 3, which gives me the absolute value of 2x minus 7 equals 3. Now that I have the absolute value by itself, I can do that plus or minus thing. So 2x minus 7 equals 3, or 2x minus 7 equals negative 3. And then I solve with the same tactics I've been using before. I add 7 to both sides, and then divide by 2, giving me x equals 5. And I add 7 to both sides over here, giving me 2x equals 4, so x equals 2. So I got 2 solutions, and I can check those by plugging them in to the original equation. Now sometimes it will be possible that there's no solution. For instance, absolute value of 3x plus 5 plus 6 equals negative 2. So my first step to solve this would be to subtract 6 from both sides. And negative 2 minus 6 is negative 8. Now let's think about that for a second. The absolute value of all this equals negative 8. Can the absolute value of something be negative? Remember that the absolute value means the distance from 0, and distance is always taken as positive. So we can't have a negative distance, so there's no solution in this case. So if we get that down to where the absolute value, adjust the absolute value all by itself on one side equals a negative number, then we have no solution. One of the times that we use absolute values when we're talking about absolute deviation. And we have a formula for absolute deviation. Absolute deviation equals the absolute value of our measurement, x, or whatever we're looking for, x, will represent the variable of what we're measuring, minus whatever our given value, our accepted value is. The perfect example they have here in the book is for the weight of a professional basketball. A professional basketball has to be a certain weight or within a certain range of that rate. And that's measured in air pressure. And so we're going to use P to represent air. On it to be at is our given value. And they want the air pressure of a basketball to be at 8 psi. So we would write P minus 8 because we want our pressures to be close to 8. And our absolute error is 0.5 psi. That tells us how far off we can be. Essentially, that means we can be 8 plus 0.5 psi or 8 minus 0.5 psi. So to solve this equation, P minus 8 has to equal 0.5 or negative 0.5. And then we solve by adding 8 to both sides, which gives us 8.5 and 7.5. Those are our minimum and maximum acceptable pressures. Alright, I'd like you to try a couple of these problems. I'll give you 2 absolute value problems, and you can work them through with the video paused and see what you come up with, and then restart the video and see the walkthrough. So go ahead and start and pause the video and see how you do. Okay, so on the left, our first step is to subtract 4 from both sides, which gives us 2 times the absolute value of m minus 5 equals negative 2. And then we divide by 2, which gives us m minus 5, absolute value of m minus 5 equals negative 1. But remember, the absolute value can't equal a negative number. So this is a no solution case. Now on the right, we see we have a negative on the other side, but we don't want to make our judgment too early. We want to make sure that we get the absolute values part by itself first. So we start by adding 7 to both sides, which gives us negative 3 times the absolute value of n plus 2 is equal to negative 3. And when we divide by negative 3, we get the absolute value of n plus 2 is a positive 1. So this is solvable by splitting into n plus 2 equals 1 and n plus 2 equals negative 1. Subtracting 2 from both sides gives us n equals negative 1 and n equals negative 3. Alright, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. You can watch the video again if you need something clarified, or you can go ahead and start on your homework.